week, we've been focusing on different aspects of the economy right here on the India Development Debate, of course, in the run-up to Budget 2020. And across the board, the biggest concern has been a drop in consumption. The drop in demand for items ranging from biscuits to cars to homes is hitting everyone. The pinch is being felt in rural and urban India, and it's almost like a vicious cycle. The more consumption drops, the less is the confidence to consume, feeding into more and more people holding back discretionary spends. So can this budget bring back consumer confidence? Does the answer lie in increasing disposable income in the hands of people? And which people are those? From which segment? Helping us analyze the consumption slump today is a stellar panel of experts. I'm joined by Rama Bijapurkar, management consultant and consumption expert, Prasun Basu, South Asia Zone President of Nielsen Global Connect, and DK Joshi, Director and Chief Economist of CRISIL. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for speaking with us today. Ms. Bijapurkar, let me begin by getting your take on the basic issue. So consumption is the key word in the last few months. It is being looked at as the biggest reason for the economic slowdown. First of all, do you agree with that assessment that Indian consumers who were driving the economy have suddenly started holding back?
Well, obviously people are not spending as much as they are. That is a fact. The rate of growth of consumption has slowed down. That is also a fact. But to think about consumption as a standalone, which seems to be the discourse, is actually what I want to challenge a little bit. I think let's take a people view of consumption that explains it better than the supply side view or even the macroeconomic variables. Is the desire to consume in consumer India there? It is extremely strong.
Yeah.
Has been, will be. Why are they not consuming? Obviously because incomes are not growing as much as they should. India is a country of self-employed people. Most people don't get a regular salary. The shocks are much greater. A lot of the way in which they earn is through construction, through labor, through agriculture, and so on. As a result of which, as we know, investment is the problem. The wheels of economic activity are not turning as much as they should, as a result of which people don't get enough income. And when they don't get enough income and there's not enough work going around, then they are spooked because they are self-employed. And when you don't get a regular paycheck, you get spooked pretty badly and you hold back on your consumption, and that's really it. So when we say companies are not investing because they don't see demand, I think that really doesn't make sense. I think companies see demand extremely well. They say so. In the long term, if you don't see demand in India, then where are you going to see demand? That is my question.
That's a fascinating statement, because I hear that all of the time. Companies are not investing because they don't see the demand, or they don't know if the demand is going to come, and you're challenging that.
Yeah, I'm saying that there is obviously demand that there is, and why are companies not investing? I think they're not investing because of a whole set of issues. They're not investing because of NPAs, because of NCLT. Just look at the amount of revenue at risk, because of an unstable regulatory environment, because of shock and awe regulation, because all the regulators are in overdrive, because Supreme Court has its own issues. I mean, it takes sector after sector after sector. I mean, the real estate problem is not because people are not dying to buy houses.
Yeah.
The problem lies somewhere else. And tomorrow, if you take up the telecom rates, then you're going to, which is not because of demand, but because obviously, as you are aware, the issue that is forcing telecom companies to take up rates, you are going to have so many shockwaves going through the consumer, because telecom is your central nervous system. You will have even less of consumption. So companies do see long-term demand. I think if you don't see it in India, you won't see it anywhere else. But I think companies are so full of their own problems at this point in time that they're not investing. And if you don't invest and the wheels of economic activity doesn't turn and people don't have income growth, how do you expect them to spend? So if you go and fix consumption, is that going to make the real estate sector vibrant all of a sudden? I think the desire to consume is there.
Well, maybe at better prices, maybe knowing when,
prices are at rock bottom.
Yeah.
Prices are at rock bottom on a lot of issues.
How much of a part does the confidence bit play in? Prasun, I want you to come in here. When we send out our teams to report on segments like FMCG, especially in rural areas, you see that people are replacing. So maybe they're still buying hair oil, but maybe a non-branded smaller packet. So consumption is there, but is discretionary spends getting hampered? Are we seeing someone who perhaps is interested in investing in real estate but don't know if they're going to have a job to pay an EMI, and so then they're holding back? Is that what we're seeing, Prasun?
So I think let's just dial back and look at a very simple framework, right? So one part of it is the consumer, the other part is the environment, which is the corporate, the companies, the government, etc. Right? So on the consumer, you talked about consumer confidence. So Nielsen does global work on this, including work in India, and the confidence drop in India is much smaller than what you are seeing in terms of sales drop and purchase and consumption drop. So obviously it's not consumer confidence that's leading this drop. That is only part of the story.
Okay.
That's the first point we need to note. The second is, if you now go away from the consumer to the supply side of the story, then the picture looks quite stark, we agree. But again, based on a very large amount of work we have done across hundreds of brands, there is a full model that shows when a company does well or doesn't do well, when brands grow and not grow, around 55% of the success of sales is in the control of the company, and 45% is uncontrollable factors. When I say uncontrollable factors, it could be government work, it could be rainfall, it could be climate, it could be all kinds of things. So that's only 45%. The other 55% is in the control of the brand and the owners, right? So we do need to address the 45%, which is where maybe your point about budget, etc. comes in.
Yeah.
But I would still say that there is that big ownership that companies also have. If you look at 2019, our data, innovations have gone down by 25%. Distribution growth has been minimal. We've got around 4 to 5% distribution growth, which is one of the lowest. Now, within that, smaller manufacturers have gone even more starkly lower on innovation and on distribution. That's because they don't have deep pockets, right? The larger companies, I would say, relatively have done a better job on both innovation as well as distribution growth, but they need to be even more bullish. If they took the front view to say that I am going to actually invest in my consumer and in my product and my innovation technology, then the picture would be different. And I think that picture is something that sector can play to really create future growth for themselves, great products for consumers, get the wallets back in shape.
Which is also a function of confidence, I guess.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, so that is a confidence hit, but at a different level. Let me get DK Joshi in on this. Mr. Joshi, you've heard the opening comments, and before we come to the question about what can the finance minister do in the budget, what can the government do, I want you to sort of lay down your reading of all of the commentary of why the Indian consumer, which has been the powerhouse of the economy for decades really, has attracted all kinds of products and companies here despite tough regulations. Everyone wants to be in India. What has happened to her? Why is she holding back?
Well, I think that's true that household consumption was the fastest growing part of the GDP for last 8 to 9 years. And now I think consumers were not only saving less, but they were also leveraging themselves. So I think the culture was shifting towards more consumption, and the younger people meant that the more younger people meant that the proclivity to leverage and to consume, save less. I think so. All these things were also firing consumption. Now what has happened is with the slowdown in growth, slowdown in incomes, whether it started off with the rural because the terms of trade for farmers were very weak. I mean, food inflation was only 0.1% in 2018-19. So low food inflation in a way means wealth transfer from rural to urban areas, because I think the farmers don't get adequate return for their products. And by the way, rural consumption was the fastest growing part. I mean, it was growing much faster than urban consumption. So clearly, I think so there was a hit to demand from the low pricing, low food inflation, so to say. And then on top of that, I think slowdown also meant, I think, lower job opportunities, etc. And I think all that reduced the leverage, the ability to leverage for the households. And I think that is also playing out. So I think in overall, the speed with which consumption was growing cannot be sustained without, I think, economic activity growing fast. I mean, whether you look at exports or you look at domestic production, I think all of them are in the slow zone right now. I mean, so to say, and overall, I think what also has impacted this consumption sentiment, I think, is the NBFC slowdown. I mean, the hit to the NBFC sector accentuated the slowdown, because when banks were not able to provide credit, the NBFCs were very aggressive, I think, in the last 2-3 years, and now I think they have also slowed down. So overall, I think the sentiment of the consumer, as reflected even in the RBI surveys, I think has been sliding down. So in this scenario, this is getting reflected in lower capacity utilization. So which essentially means that for corporates who have more money to invest now because of the corporate tax cut, will still not do that, because I think they don't see visibility of demand in the near term. So I think unless that visibility starts, I think the private investment outlook will also remain weak.
This is sounding like a chicken and egg question almost. Is the slowdown leading to less consumption, or is it falling consumption which is fueling the slowdown?
To my mind, there is no chicken and egg. If you do not have income, you do not consume. I mean, I think that is the people view of the world. Right? I mean, I know that there are formulae that say consumption leads to GDP and so on, but what we're discussing right now is why are people spending less? If you have been earning as a construction laborer and there is not much construction activity happening, if there is not much haulage, you do not have much income. If you have 3 relatives who work in an auto company, the auto company is laying off people. At the end of that, you will not have work. The top 20% of India is still reasonably cushioned in terms of the surplus income that they have. The rest of India, which is as large a consumer market, has very fragile household profit and loss accounts, if you like. And I'm self-employed, and I know that I get spooked, because would I buy a new car if I didn't know if my consulting practice would be okay? I don't know.
No, everyone is spooked.
Everyone if you get a regular paycheck, it's a little better.
Yeah, but you don't.
But hardly any of consumer India does. Very small proportions.
Yes.
And again, look at both perspectives. The consumer perspective, actual data, our data shows that super premium brands are doing well. Premium and super premium is doing well, right? It's the value brands which are not doing well. So that's where the hit is coming. But there is money at a certain set of consumers to buy. That's one side of the story. Second, if you look at the retail side of the story and the trade side, India has 10 million retail establishments, 10 million, right? If you look at that establishments, e-commerce, and you look at modern trade has gone from 8% growth to 15% growth this year. E-commerce on a small base is at 50% growth. Traditional trade, those 10 million stores and throughput through it has gone down from 14 to 6. So what do we do to help that sector?
This is an interesting point, because whenever on a broader level, and of course I'm talking to top experts here, but the consumption story has now become something which everyone is discussing. Okay, not just you guys who track it. And very often those who want to defend the current scenario say that, hey, look at the number of luxury cars being sold, or look at how these brands are doing so well, and that proves the point you're making. So is this coming more from rural India, the lower strata of society? They are the ones who are suffering the most?
It's coming big time from rural, unfortunately, big time. And just if you look at numbers, so there's been the growth rate in urban has dropped by 7.5%, by 2.5%, and it's only 2.5%. The growth rate in rural has dropped by 7.5%, from 15% plus to it's now a 5%. So that's the amount of drop that's happened in rural. So it's starkly coming from rural, unfortunately, and that's where the biggest help is needed.
Which also correlates with income drops being the largest if you look at the sectors where they earn from, and if you look at whether the government has paid all the dues that it's supposed to have paid to all the construction activity. Narega has always worked as a signaling price for above which you get your labor, so they're the ones who are pretty badly hit. Airports are still full, I'll tell you that.
Rama spoke about automotive. So
passenger air traffic the growth has plunged.
Yeah.
The growth has plunged.
The growth has plunged. You've gone from 18% to 3%.
You also have one airline, more or less, up and standing, or two.
Yeah.
So on
most
the
of
point
us can't fly business
automotive,
class even if we want to.
If you look at the rural story, what happens is that a big part of the rural exposure is in the north. A large amount of the automotive ancillary companies are in the north.
Yeah.
They have big time slowed down. Unemployment has shot up in the north. That's also the rural economy, and that's the cascading effect you are seeing.
Also mining and things.
Yes.
Okay, let's start talking about what next. There has been a pretty, a detailed analysis of what the problem is. So incomes have dropped, consumption has dropped, it's slowing everything down. What can Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman do on the 1st of Feb 2020? Mr. Joshi, why don't you take that one? One suggestion is cut personal income tax or increase the amount of subsidies being given through schemes like Manrega or PM Kisan. Do you think that that's the way? Let's put down hard cash in people's hands right now?
I would agree. I mean, you need to put cash in the hands of people who have higher propensity to consume. And I think since, as was being talked about, the rural consumption has been hit most. So I think you need to start from there. For that, the first step has to be to create fiscal space. I think we all know that there is fiscal stress, and government, because of FRBM targets, etc., is actually cutting down expenditure in the fourth quarter of this fiscal year, which will reflect on growth as well. So now I think how do you create fiscal space? You will have to relax the fiscal target in a transitory manner. I mean, maybe for a year or so, and to ensure that the fiscal slippage is not too much, I think you'll have to bank more on non-tax revenues, which is, I think, asset sales, etc. So if you do both these things, I think with a reasonable amount of, tolerable amount of slippage, you will have some money to fund activities. Now, the next question is, where do you put the money? So I would say that as far as the PM Kisan is concerned, I think money is going to people who are going to spend it immediately, but the scheme is not very effective in the sense that it is not reaching out to everyone, and government is going to save money on that. Whatever was budgeted, they are unlikely to spend that. So that needs to be more effective. Second is, Narega is time tested, and I think this year also whatever was budgeted is going to be spent. I think maybe it's time to increase the spending on Narega. And then third thing is create assets, focus on rural construction, whether it is irrigation or it is roads or it is rural infrastructure. All of them are very labor intensive. Construction activity itself is labor intensive. So you are doing two things. I mean, you're creating employment by pushing Narega temporarily, and by construction is, I think, would be more durable. If once you do that, I think you will create jobs in the hinterland, as well as I think you will push consumption, because all these people have higher propensity to consume. So that's number one, and that's going to hit at that's going to benefit the people who have suffered the most. Now the next is, I think, if you still have money left,
to do it.
I think the focus should shift
Mr. Joshi, do we have the space to
say.
do it? Do we have the fiscal space to do it? Because, part of the formula that you talked about was divestment. Those are steep targets that we haven't quite met. We don't know when that money is going to come in. I know the current flavor is, let's not bother too much about 3.3% fiscal deficit. But do you honestly believe that there is the space for that kind of spending? Can we spend our way out of this one?
I think I don't think you can spend your way out of the slowdown completely, but you can support some segments of the economy which are affected, and that's going to improve sentiment also. I think of it this way: if there is fiscal stress and you don't spend, and the growth goes down further, then I think the fiscal stress is only going to mount. I mean, because the incomes are going to go down, and the taxation will itself suffer. So I think the government has to intervene at this juncture, and they need to relax the fiscal deficit target, take a temporary respite from the FRBM target, and relax the deficit a bit, and then front load your efforts towards privatization and asset sales. I think if you do that, you will create fiscal space to if not spend your way out of the slowdown, at least cushion the economy, and I think and gradually improve sentiment. So rural economy is going to benefit this year because the food inflation is high, and I think that's going to improve terms of trade for them. So I think if that is complemented by these things, I think you will see rural economy gradually come back. So this is about, I think, and then there are other issues. I mean, in higher income categories like auto sector or housing.
Yeah,
I think
no,
which
we'll
also
come to
needs,
those. Let's just keep our
support
focus
from
on the rural
budget.
economy. I believe Nielsen's latest report also sees some kind of a silver lining. You're seeing that we are maybe at the bottom. You see an upswing coming in rural consumption.
But before that, I think let's be clear. Taxes are about the most efficient allocation of people's money, right? So when I say let's cut taxes and let's give money to the consumer's hand, we are making, to your question, the government's job a little bit more difficult, right? It is about where should the right money be? What should be the stimulus? You need the money for the stimulus as well. Just putting temporary money in the hands of consumers is not the only solution in my view. The bigger thing is that where are the pain points? How do we unlock the pain points? And for that, the government does need the money to put in. Manrega definitely is a very, very good scheme, and continuing with that makes sense. But just a blind decision in terms of, okay, let me give more money to the consumer straight away, I don't think is the answer to the question. That's a very, very clear point to keep in mind. The other bit about food inflation going up, again, it's a bit of a double-edged sword, right? Yes, it will help the farmer. Absolutely, prices going up, etc., will help the farmer. But today, you look at the FMCG sector, which is a very large part of rural, right? Almost 40% of the contribution to overall FMCG comes from rural. And historically, for the last 4-5 years, rural has grown at 30 to 40% more than urban. Today, this year, for the first time in 7 years, rural is below urban, right? So as inflation goes up, food inflation goes up, that means purchases in rural will not get stimulated.
Yeah, they're also consumers.
Right, they're consumers. They're more consumers than producers, right?
Absolutely.
What do you do with that 40% of the consumer base if they don't grow? So it's very, very important to think about both sides of this coin, really.
In terms of solutions, because I'm just about rounding off the debate. So in terms of solutions for Budget 2020, your recommendations?
So I definitely would say that we need directed spends. We need spends where it matters. We do need spends in rural for sure, the right kind of space at the right places. One of the big challenges that have happened is that commodity prices and input prices have risen a lot in the last 1 year. That has made the job of the manufacturers difficult, right? Is there any way for the budget to address those kinds of things becomes important? How do we get commodity prices under control? How do we get money in the hands of the farmers and let them do a better job, bring more technology and infrastructure into that space is very, very important. SMEs have to be supported. What can I do to support the SMEs? 10 million shops means at least 20 million people.
Yeah, and that's a very interesting thing because all that anger is being directed right now at Amazon and Flipkart.
Amazon and Flipkart is a small part of the economy today, right?
Exactly. So it's not about these guys are taking all of our demand. It's a different set of people who aren't buying.
India is not a zero-sum game.
I'm going to make your question, of course, Budget 2020, but I'm going to make it a little tougher. So we talk about things that should be done. There are loads of announcements in every budget. The lag it takes for them to even be implemented or kick off the ground. We don't have the time this time around, considering where we are in the slowdown. What needs to be done which can show some kind of results sooner than later, off the bat?
So I think we're talking signaling. I think that's very big. Corporate balance sheets have money. I think they're saying, signal to me, please give me a sign from God somewhere that the rural consumer is ready to spend. That's what I'm getting out of it. But there is another part to it, and that is a signaling that says it's safe to invest. There will be not shock and no regulation. Cleanup will be done in a calibrated fashion. And I'm saying that's the elephant in the room that people are not calling out. So in the shortest possible period of time, pay whatever your dues are as a government to start whatever activities you have in the rural sector and so on. But more than that, signal correctly. I mean, signal that there will be, that it is absolutely safe to invest. And I think there is only, not seeing immediate demand is only one part of the investment problem. Yeah. I think we all know that, and I think we're making consumption the whipping boy. So I would say think very strongly about signaling in this budget in addition to everything else you do.
Well, it's the message that matters, and hopefully it will be the right one. Thank you so much for joining us on the special Budget 2020 debate. DK Joshi, Rama Bijapurkar and Prasun Basu. Well, unemployment is low. Consumption is dropping. We hope for the best from the budget, but we'll take a very short break here on India Development Debate. When we come back, we're talking politics and the newsmaker of the day, Mr. Pavan Verma of the JDU, will join us after the break. He's written an open letter to his boss, Nitish Kumar, saying that he doesn't agree with his position on CA and NRC and is wondering why he's still with the BJP. His boss has said, well, if you don't like it, you can join some other party. What is Mr. Verma saying about it? I'll ask him after the break. Don't go away.